1:15 a.m., the Strait of Hormuz. For several seconds, everything is quiet. The sea is dark, the horizon is almost invisible, and the screens aboard the American fleet show only the usual patterns of traffic, weather, and distant movement. Then, without warning, the silence collapses. A wave of electronic noise crashes into the system like a storm made of pure data. Radar screens light up with thousands of phantom contacts, all appearing at once. Some targets race across the display at impossible speeds. Others vanish before the computers can even classify them. Within moments, reliable information is buried beneath a blizzard of false signals. At one of the most important maritime chokepoints on Earth, an invisible fog has descended. And inside that fog, even the most advanced aircraft in the world can suddenly become blind. Iran has not opened with a conventional strike. It has opened with something far more disorienting, a digital blinding operation designed to overwhelm the senses of the U.S. Navy before the first physical move is even made. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a narrow passage between coastlines. It has become a high-stakes electronic battlefield. Every day, around 21 million barrels of oil move through this corridor. And in a crisis like this, one wrong move could send fuel prices spiraling overnight. For the ships now entering this zone, the sea ahead is no longer free, calm, or predictable. Iran's first move is silent, but it cuts deep. Jamming stations along Bandar Abbas come alive almost simultaneously, building a wall of interference across the coast. Frequencies that were clear seconds earlier are now polluted with false returns, corrupted signals, and ghost images. The goal is simple: isolate the U.S. fleet, confuse its sensors, and force its commanders to make decisions inside a storm of uncertainty. At 1:17 a.m., high above the water, a P-8 Poseidon tries to punch through the electronic fog. Its powerful Raytheon AN/APY-10 radar sweeps across the strait, searching for ships, launchers, and patterns that make sense. But the tactical map refuses to stabilize. The clean blue display is gradually swallowed by a chaotic snowstorm of interference. Each radar sweep should reveal the structure of the battlefield. Instead, it returns confusion. Thousands of targets flash on and off the screen, some moving at Mach 5, others appearing in places no real aircraft or boat could possibly be. The system is not simply being jammed, it is being overloaded. "They're not just blocking us," the electronic warfare officer calls out, his fingers racing across the keyboard. "They're flooding the processor." He tries to filter the frequencies. He tries to separate real movement from artificial noise. But it is like trying to hear a single whisper inside a hurricane. The battlefield picture breaks apart into streaks of white, static, and uncertainty. Then the Poseidon's combat display erupts again. More false contacts pour into the system. The phantom targets are not random. They are creating gaps, hiding the real positions of Iranian missile boats and mobile launchers beneath layers of digital deception. "We're being smothered by electronic ghosts," the operations officer says as the map dissolves into meaningless patterns. At 1:22 a.m., the USS Abraham Lincoln receives the news that no carrier commander wants to hear. The all-seeing eye above the fleet has been blinded. The aircraft carrier continues forward anyway, moving toward the red line. The 100,000-ton Nimitz-class supercarrier enters the combat zone with thousands of sailors aboard. Every system alert, every crew member aware that hesitation could be just as dangerous as aggression. The digital ambush has forced the United States into a narrow space with almost no room to step back. The quiet standoff is over. The next stage is about to begin. At 1:24 a.m., the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln comes alive. White steam rolls across the flight deck as two F-35C Lightning II fighters move into launch position. Their F-135 engines roar with more than 43,000 pounds of thrust, shaking the deck beneath them. The catapult locks in. The aircraft are heavy, each one packed with stealth technology, sensors, fuel, and precision munitions. Then, in a violent burst of acceleration, the system releases. 30 tons of advanced aviation technology is thrown into the night sky, climbing from the carrier at high speed and disappearing into the darkness. The battle has shifted. It is no longer only a contest of signals, codes, and deception. Now the fleet is moving to locate and disable the physical sources behind the electronic storm. At 1:30 a.m., the F-35Cs approach Iran's air defense network in complete radio silence. They do not announce themselves. They do not rely on active radar. Their stealth coding is designed to reduce their signature, allowing them to slip through hostile airspace like shadows. But Iran has prepared another trap. As the fighters approach the coastline, their GPS signals begin to collapse under intense interference from high-density jamming stations. The aircraft's position data becomes unstable, then unreliable. The digital map flickers with uncertainty. Lost GPS, switch to manual mode. The flight leader orders. In that moment, the pilots stopped trusting satellites and switched to their second set of eyes, the Lockheed Martin electro-optical targeting system. Instead of sending out radar energy, the aircraft now search passively through infrared, reading heat signatures without revealing their own position. At 1:34 a.m., the pilots find what appear to be Iranian mobile missile batteries along the coast. The targets show up as hot shapes against the colder terrain. The F-35Cs open their internal weapons bays, preserving their stealth profile until the final moment. 2 GBU-39 small-diameter munitions are released. Their wings unfold in the night air, and instead of relying on satellite guidance, they follow laser designation from the aircraft. Through the chaos of the electronic storm, the munitions glide toward the coast with careful precision. Moments later, bright bursts of flame rise along the dark shoreline. For a brief moment, the rugged coastline is lit by orange light, revealing the terrain beneath the night sky. But by 1:39 a.m., as the dust clears on the EOTS display, the sense of success fades almost instantly. High-resolution imagery confirms an uncomfortable truth. The targets were not real launchers. They were decoys, carefully built structures made from plywood, heat sources, and imitation equipment designed to look convincing from the air. Their purpose was not to fight. Their purpose was to draw out expensive American munitions. Iran's main assets remain protected, hidden inside hardened shelters and concrete facilities carved deep into the mountainside. The first strike looked impressive, but it had not reached the core of the threat. Most of Iran's counterstrike capability is still intact, waiting for the Lincoln to move deeper into the engagement envelope. At 1:45 a.m., Iran escalates. Its strategic electronic warfare network surges to full power. This is no longer simple jamming. It is a large-scale spoofing operation, designed to rewrite what the American fleet believes it is seeing. Thousands of Phantom aircraft appear across the U.S. combat network. Radar displays show waves of Iranian planes charging toward the fleet from multiple directions. The Link 16 system, the backbone of American battlefield coordination, is overwhelmed by streams of false data. Reality and illusion begin to merge. At 1:48 a.m., inside the cockpit of an F-35C, the tension climbs sharply. The very system that makes the aircraft so powerful, its sensor fusion, is now under pressure. The computer is trying to combine radar information, infrared data, electronic emissions, and networked intelligence into one clean picture. But now that picture is polluted. The aircraft is receiving too much, too many targets, too many warnings, too many contradictions. But American pilots train for this kind of digital fog. Their response is immediate. Absolute emission control. Active radar goes silent. External data is treated with suspicion. The pilots shift almost entirely to passive sensors. At 1:50 a.m., the engagement becomes something closer to digital close-quarters combat. The pilots no longer have the comfort of long-range radar clarity or fully trusted data links. Instead, they rely on the Northrop Grumman Distributed Aperture System, a network of 6 infrared cameras that gives the pilot a 360-degree view around the aircraft. The F-35 can see above, behind, and even below itself. The pilot is no longer just looking through a cockpit canopy. He is surrounded by a sphere of thermal vision. The fight becomes primitive in a strange way, not because the aircraft is old, but because the pilots are forced to hunt through contrast, instinct, and heat. They search for engine exhaust, hot metal, and movement that behaves like a real machine rather than a computer-generated ghost. For every real contact they identify, Iranian spoofing systems generate 10 more false ones. Aegis combat systems across the carrier group see their data reliability falling into dangerous territory. Ship commanders are forced to manually verify targets before committing to action. The Navy is still powerful, but its hands are tied. It is trying to find the real opponent inside a sea of digital illusions, while Iran uses that confusion to hide a more direct physical threat. At 2 a.m., Iran makes its move. Under the cover of the electronic fog, fast attack boats from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps surge across the water at nearly 50 knots. At the same time, waves of Shahed-style one-way drones descend toward the fleet. The drones fly extremely low, skimming just above the waves to reduce their radar signature. At only about 10 feet above the surface, they are difficult to detect. The 6-foot swells make them even harder to separate from sea clutter. On the Aegis screens, they appear late, faint, and uncertain, almost like shadows rising out of the spray. At 2:13 a.m., the destroyers begin fighting at the edge of reaction time. Raytheon's Aegis combat system strains to prioritize the threats through the interference. The Phalanx CIWS mounts rotate into position with mechanical speed, tracking the closest incoming objects. Then the 20mm M61 Vulcan cannons open fire. They do not sound like ordinary guns. They sound like a giant machine tearing through the night. Streams of glowing tracers carve lines across the sky, reaching out toward the low-flying drones. The first wave is ripped apart in midair, breaking into burning fragments that tumble toward the sea. But for every drone intercepted, more appear through the darkness and ocean spray. The CIWS barrels glow red from the heat of sustained fire. The destroyers vibrate under the pressure of their own defensive systems. Inside the combat information centers, officers shout updates as new contacts emerge on the port side. The fleet is holding, but the cost is rising. At 2:18 a.m., aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, the Admiral faces the brutal mathematics of modern combat. Every time an escort ship launches an expensive interceptor to stop a cheap drone, the United States loses ground in the economic side of the engagement. The destroyers do not carry unlimited interceptors. Their vertical launch systems can only hold so many. If those advanced defensive weapons are spent on waves of low-cost drones and small boats, the fleet may have too little left for the heavier threats waiting behind them. We're running low on interceptors, the operations officer warns, as more launch cells go empty. At 2:25 a.m., the Admiral chooses a risky solution: hard MCON. The entire carrier strike group reduces its emissions and cuts radio communications. To Iranian sensors, the fleet begins to fade into a black hole. This makes it harder for guided weapons to track and target the ships, but it also weakens American coordination. The fleet becomes quieter, but also more isolated. Disconnect the AI assistants. Switch to reduced performance mode, the Admiral orders. It is a strange decision in the age of advanced warfare. Step back from the most sophisticated digital systems and return control to human judgment. The F-35Cs have done their job as stealthy scouts and precision strikers. But now the fleet needs something different. It needs the raw, rugged force of the Super Hornet. At 2:33 a.m., the flight deck erupts again as Boeing F/A-18E/F Super Hornets launch into the night. If the F-35 is a scalpel, then the Super Hornet is a hammer. Tough, heavily armed, and built to operate in messy, low-altitude combat. Even while Iran's digital deception continues to disrupt the local network, the Hornets still have a lifeline. The P-8 Poseidon, now outside the worst of the jamming zone, climbs higher and becomes a kind of airborne relay. Using narrowband satellite communications and secure directional links, it creates a cleaner pathway for tactical information. Iran's wideband jamming systems struggle to interfere with this focused stream. The P-8 pulls data from the broader Pentagon network and sends critical updates directly to the Super Hornets through hardened channels. At 2:40 a.m., the Super Hornets dive into the danger area, flying only a few hundred feet above the sea. This is no longer a stealth engagement. This is a close, aggressive hunt across the water. The pilots use ATFLIR targeting pods to visually identify hot exhaust plumes and moving boats among the waves. Once they confirm a target, they move fast. The M61 Vulcan 20mm cannon roars again, this time from the aircraft themselves. In high-speed passes, the Hornets sweep across the surface, tearing into the fast boats and forcing the formation to break apart. Rounds punch through fiberglass hulls, damage engines, and set fuel stores alight. The sea becomes chaotic, filled with smoke, spray, and disabled craft drifting out of formation. At 2:52 a.m., the decisive advantage comes from APKWS rockets. These are 70mm Hydra rockets upgraded with laser guidance, turning a simple and inexpensive weapon into a precise tool. The Super Hornets launch them in rapid succession. Each rocket locks onto the laser designation from the pilots and curves toward its assigned point with frightening accuracy. Command decks, engines, and control points are struck one after another. This changes the economic equation. Instead of spending million-dollar interceptors on low-cost threats, the United States can now answer with cheaper precision weapons of its own. The attrition problem begins to reverse. Dozens of small targets can be disabled without burning through the fleet's most valuable defensive arsenal. At 3 a.m., Iran responds with shoulder-fired air defense missiles launched from surviving boats. The night sky fills with smoke trails and bright flares as the Super Hornets maneuver hard above the water. But the F/A-18E/F was built for this kind of rough environment. Its defensive systems respond quickly, and its pilots rely on timing, speed, and instinct. Flares burst behind them, aircraft bank sharply away from incoming threats. The Hornets survive by being aggressive, unpredictable, and tough. In a world where the digital battlefield has become unreliable, they are the analog knights of the sky, winning not through perfect data, but through experience and nerve. The Iranian boat formation begins to collapse. Burning wreckage drifts across the sea. The immediate naval threat has been pushed back. But the heart of the problem still remains on land. At 3:15 a.m., with the Iranian surface formation broken and the strait littered with damaged craft, the Lockheed Martin F-35C Lightning IIs climb back to their primary altitude. The Super Hornets have provided the force needed to regain control of the sea. Now the F-35s return for the final, precise part of the operation. They do not switch on radar. They do not announce themselves. Instead, they become silent collectors of information, passively listening for the electronic signatures still pouring from Iran's command centers and jamming sites. Their sensors begin to map the source of the digital fog. Each signal is analyzed, compared, and triangulated. Without emitting a single radar pulse, the F-35s identify the locations feeding the electronic chaos across the strait. Then, the order comes through. Cut off the brain. The pilots guide AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles toward the transmitters responsible for the interference. These weapons are designed to follow hostile radar and electronic emissions back to the source. They launch into the darkness and race toward the coast. Along the shoreline near Bandar Abbas, bright flashes appear one after another. Power sources, transmitters, and command nodes are knocked offline in rapid succession. The electronic warfare network that had blinded the fleet begins to collapse. Almost instantly, the fog starts to lift. The Link 16 screens stabilize, the radar picture clears, false contacts vanish. What was once a storm of illusions becomes a readable battlefield again. The Strait of Hormuz has not been recovered through brute force alone. It has been taken back through adaptation, discipline, and tactical thinking under pressure. But imagine an even darker version of this scenario. What if Iran successfully carried out a high-resolution GPS spoofing attack? Not just interfering with American systems, but rewriting what those systems believed was real? On the Aegis screen of a U.S. destroyer, an approaching hostile craft might not appear as a threat at all. It might be disguised as a friendly oil tanker, carrying the right digital signature, moving along a believable route, and blending perfectly into the surrounding traffic. If the system trusts the digital label more than the human eye, that false identity could buy precious minutes. The contact could be marked safe. The watch team might not notice the discrepancy until the craft was already dangerously close. Then, in one blinding moment, the illusion would become physical reality. A blast against the hull could tear through the confidence of a billion-dollar warship and turn advanced technology into burning metal. That is the real warning hidden inside this scenario. In the age of cyber and electronic warfare, power is no longer measured only in steel, speed, or firepower. Sometimes a line of code can reach deeper than any conventional weapon. Sometimes the most dangerous attack is not the one that strikes first, but the one that convinces your machines to look the wrong way. So the question remains, is a modern fleet truly invincible if the enemy can control what its machines are allowed to see?